Dr. Dan. Take it away.
Well, it's a privilege for me to introduce Susan. And we've known each other for about 9 years. And Susan reminded me that it was at a yoga class, and I was introduced to Susan, and we, at that time, I really wanted a dietitian for the hospital and for integrative medicine. I was the medical director for integrative medicine for 12 years, and I retired 2 years ago. But that's how Susan and I met. So she's been a dietitian at St. Luke's Integrative Medicine Clinic and the hospital up to, I think Susan just retired just a year ago from that. And now she has her own private practice, which she's had for a long time, called Mint. And she has continued to give advice to members of the community. And now I think through internet, you could probably go all over the world to give advice too. Susan told me that she attended Berkeley and got a degree in nutrition and food sciences. And then she did a clinical at University of California, San Francisco. She then took a little bit of a hiatus and did medical devices and product development. And then I think once Susan moved to McCall, she got to live her passion. And her passion is bringing healthy nutritional advice to a community. And I've really enjoyed working with Susan, listening to her talk. And I always learn something new every time that Susan talks. I guess with that introduction, and today's talk is the master foods for brain health. And in February, I gave talks on sleep and how sleep is a pillar and maybe even a foundation of integrative medicine. Because I brought it down to foundation, but now that we're talking about nutrition, this is one of my favorite subjects. I'm changing this one from a pillar to another foundation. Nutrition is a foundation for good health. And with that introduction, I think we're going to go ahead and let Susan give her presentation.
Thank you, Dan, for that warm welcome. That was amazing. Thank you. And it really, I love hearing you talk about our times together, the 7 years at Integrative Medicine Clinic, because Dan was really my inspiration to keep going on my practice, which, as you said, was my passion after I retired from a corporate life. And I really wanted to get back into my nutrition. So it's really a dream come true. So thank you. Today is really, as any day, I work in area nutrition, the pinnacle of making this happen. So thank you all for joining us and tuning in. It really means a lot to me to share this information with you. And today we're talking about brain function and the nutrients that are required to get optimal brain function. But this summer, I was inspired by this concept of going upstream as I got on my paddleboard with a girlfriend and we went up to Upper Payette Lake, and we paddled the lake all the way to the source of the Payette. And so we started thinking about, wow, that source of the water is so important for, the fauna and the flora along that river, for what happens to the topography of those rocks that are in the river. And what ultimately ends up as our beautiful lake, source of recreation where we play and swim, and obviously the water we drink. And so what happens at that source affects a lot going downstream. So if we think of our bodies as that amazing, beautiful river, and the lake is kind of how we emerge, we need to go to the source to really understand how we can, with our nutrition, as we're talking about today. As Dan said, there's a lot of areas of lifestyle that can affect it. But today we're going to focus on how we can use our food as a foundational at a cellular level. So we talk about treating symptoms, like let's say reflux or weight gain or whatever you want, people come in for acne or what have you. Or thyroid dysfunction, we can treat those symptoms, But what if we could treat it with food at a cellular level? It's very exciting. And yes, we can. So when we refer to upstream, we're referring to what happens at the foundation, the very cellular level of our bodies. So then we'll, when we're going to go through first what happens in the brain, in the cell of the brain, and then why, and that'll give us a foundation as to why the nutrients I picked as the master ingredient list are so important for good brain function. And as we know, brain function is cognition, memory, ability to learn. It's also behavior. And we think about performance, athletic performance, or just daily living, and certainly mood. So whether we're 8 or 80, and I wish we had a lot of 8-year-olds on here actually, this topic is super important for anybody in terms of all stages of life. So as I said, we're going to go upstream to the cellular level. And we're going to develop a master ingredient list. We're going to identify those supportive nutrients in foods. And then we're going to translate the science to the plate and gain confidence in actually preparing these foods to make them bioavailable, most bioavailable, the way we can actually use these nutrients very efficiently. So can we apply cooking techniques? Yes, we can, to make these nutrients super bioavailable for us to use. So the idea here is to ditch the single nutrients or single ingredients that are really good for a specific body part, such as a nutrient that would be good for your bones or even your brains, but replace it with the idea that ingredients that we can get from our foods, from the store, our local store, super convenient, collectively provide foundational support for the bodies from our cells all the way up. So the antithesis of that, again, would be to patch up the symptoms. But what if we don't even look at the organs or the systems, but we go right to the cellular level, correct or support what's happening there? Then we affect our systems, our organs, and our symptoms, our signs and symptoms resolve. Wouldn't that be amazing? So let's get brainy. Let's look at what happens in the brain that we need to think about relative to our nutrition. So the brain is the control center of the body. It controls, keeps us healthy. It's crucial for basically every system, our mental and our physical health. It's responsible for cognitive function, including attention, focus, learning capacity, memory. But apart from these functions, it's also responsible for regulating all of our hormones and other biological processes. It also influences our gastrointestinal health, or sometimes referred to our gut health, and what we've all been tuned into most recently, our immune resilience, and much more. So super important, again, for all stages of life. One interesting fact is that the brain is 60% fat. So is our dietary fat important? Are there specific types of fats that might be more beneficial than others? And yes, there are, and we're going to get to that in just a minute when we look at the list of foods. Toxins, though, can easily cross into the brain. So we start thinking, oh, the brain is pretty sensitive to toxins that we make internally, and toxins that we're exposed to from our food, our beverages, our water, our air, and even the soil around us. So everything that we're exposed to needs to be detoxified. If it's not, it easily crosses into the brain. So wouldn't detoxification support be super important for our brain cells? Yes, it is. So we need to think about upregulating that detoxification to support our brain. This sounds like a lot, but I promise you we're going to get to one simple list of these foods that do it all. So the brain draws a lot of energy. It's a big energy and oxygen requirement for brain function. And when that oxygenation happens inside the brain, It's like an apple sitting on a counter or a piece of metal that's exposed to the elements along the highway. What happens? That apple browns and that metal rusts. Well, the same thing, basically, very good analogy, very close, similar, happens in our brain. And we need to be able to clean up that browning or that rust. In medical terminology, it's called oxidative stress, so that our brain cells remain healthy and we don't have premature aging. So we start to think, what can I do with my nutrients that helps or supports oxidative stress or cleaning up that browning or rusting? And certainly there's genetic variations. That may be another reason why the health of our brain is affected. Our cognition function may not be as optimal as we like. But what we'll learn today is that actually certain nutrients on our master list can actually override genetic predisposition. So can we address all of this with nutrients and food right from our kitchens? The answer is yes, we can. It's pretty exciting. So here's a quick pictorial of just what I talked about. The cellular wall here surrounded and bathed in a lot of fat. And we have our DNA strands there that help us fight oxidative stress and inflammation and that browning. You see the toxic load there, and that's a detoxification. Then we have the oxidative stress, that browning of the apple or the rusting metal. We have inflammation that's caused from the sensitivity to toxins in our body, and we have those dust bunnies being cleaned up, and then we have those genes there that are supporting the whole mechanism. So many and I hear a lot of this when I talk with people in my clinic or even around my friends, and they say, oh, the genetics people seem to be a little fearful of their genetics, or they think their genetics might impact their brain health over the long term. They possibly have family members that have had dementia, Alzheimer's, ADHD, autism, and they're wondering if their genes actually are playing a role in their destiny, in other words, or their children's destiny. But the good news is that our brain health and all of these genes are impacted by our environment, and they're tremendously sensitive to our environment. So when I mentioned we can actually override these genes with the foods that we choose, and specifically with this master list I'm going to propose as a way to start, then we know that through diet and exercise, stress, sleep also, and reducing our toxin exposure can help to override those genes. So we're talking today about the environment relative to our food and nutrients, how these foods regulate our genes to create our health. So our genes, you can think about it, are not our destiny, but our choices, how we choose to influence those genes are. Think of these foods and nutrients as switches. They're switching on and switching off those genes. So if we can get our genes to be switched on and support our detoxification, inflammation, and oxidative stress, then we're going to be having a super powerful way to influence those genes. So think about it like a Christmas tree, upregulating our genes that control oxidative stress, inflammation, and detoxification can be likened to plugging in a Christmas tree. There's a single source that can light up the entire tree, not just one light bulb. So for you citizen scientists that are joining us today, this pathway is actually called NRF2. And we're referring to if you really want the details, it's the nuclear factor erythroid 2 related factor 2. Its shortened version is NRF2. If you Google it, you can learn a little bit more about it. but it's the master switch that can turn on this Christmas tree, and it can be enhanced with our master list of foods that we're going to come up with. So think of NRF2 as that first light on the Christmas tree, and then when the tree is plugged in, the first light allows the entire tree to be lit up. So I'm sure you're waiting with bated breath on what this list of these master foods are. We're going to get to it in just a minute. So now let's move on to understand the ingredients. And it's like these ingredients will be like the plug that goes into the outlet to light up the first light and subsequently the tree. So food is information for our brains. And this graphic is a great illustration of how food becomes the information for our body to function and regenerate healthy cells. So food can literally upregulate all these processes in our body and increase function, providing us better cognition, memory, learning, behavior, balance. It's really amazing how these foods can interact and become very powerful in promoting our brain health. So nutrients and brain health, in summary, provide the building blocks for remodeling or growing our brain cells. And then they support these brain pathways, these genes that support detoxification, inflammation, balancing inflammation. In and of itself, inflammation can be a good thing. Like when we stub our toe, we want that inflammation to resolve, but we need it initially in order to rally all those defenses. But we want to balance that inflammation in our brain, and that's what these genetic pathways can do. And then we want to reduce oxidative stress, that browning that occurs. And we can do this with a focus on foods, these whole foods, right from our kitchens. So I'm sure you've seen a specific list here and there, and this is just one of a list of nutrients that are important for cognitive function. You can also look one up that's helpful for autism, that help for memory, and you'll get a laundry list, a big list of nutrients required for specific functions in the body. But it's a long list, right? But oftentimes we might feel ourselves inclined to actually supplement one or even many of these nutrients in the name of better brain health. So while supplements can target an individual, supplements, that do target an individual nutrient can be helpful, I'm making the case to really look at these another type of nutrient, a bioactive nutrient that's far more powerful than any single nutrient like a vitamin or mineral. And if we want to think of, okay, well, how much more powerful, Susan? We can almost think of it as in the million times more powerful. So versus like giving vitamin C, vitamin E, or zinc, if we upregulate these pathways through these master foods, it's 1,000,000 times literally more powerful than a single nutrient could possibly ever be. And one reason why they're more powerful is they tend to regenerate themselves. We can use them over and over again, whereas these single nutrients are vitamin C, E, zinc, A, any of these are kind of one and done. So I'm very passionate about us using more of whole foods versus targeted single nutrients in a supplement, especially when we're trying to support long-term brain health. So what are these master ingredients? And I call these the gene team. So these are bioactives, active ingredients that light up those pathways. And chances are you've probably heard of at least one or maybe all of these bioactive ingredients. But now you're kind of getting an understanding of why they're so super important. So these are the master ingredients. And the first one that I'll mention here is curcumin, because most people have heard of curcumin. It's the active ingredient in turmeric and very popular for inflammation, right? But now you know why it's so helpful in managing chronic inflammation. So quercetin is found in like your alliums like leeks, shallots, garlic, and onions. It's also found in Oh, I'm sorry. I was moved on to quercetin. Curcumin is found in turmeric, but let's move on to quercetin. It's found in the alliums, as well as, guess what, very popular elderberry. And quercetin is also found in caper berries. And look to the right there, and you'll see these amazing caperberry plants. I took this photograph when I was traveling in the Mediterranean. And these caperberries just spilled out of these window boxes all over the place. And it's obviously a beautiful plant. And if you look super closely, you can see these beautiful caperberries next to the flowers there. But obviously these people are not eating caperberries as a topping. They're using them with abundance. They're just not a condiment. They're actually part of their daily intake. And so quercetin is actually, or capers are actually a huge, very rich in quercetin. And so, is there a connection with the Mediterranean diet? Is this by coincidence? I say I don't think so. So quercetin, again, super important, and we'll translate all of this into foods for you in just a minute. But lycopene, when you think of lycopene, think red. So lycopene are your tomatoes and red or pink grapefruits. It's also found in watermelon. And so that's a very important, again, one of the master gene team here, I'm calling these master ingredients. And then resveratrol is found in peanuts, also red wine and grapes. And chances are you've heard of that relative to the importance or the ability for red wine to enhance our health. And then what enables all of these master ingredients to work is for our brains, is having omega-3 fatty acids around. We talked about fat. Remember how it's 60% of the brain. So might have started thinking, how do my fats in my diet affect my brain health? And they certainly do. So when we think about omega-3 fatty acids, we think fatty fish, but there's also some plant sources of omega-3s as well. And we'll review those in just a minute. So this master list of ingredients, okay? When we first take a look at this list, what do we notice? Vegetables. Vegetables are the longest make up the longest part of this list. And it's divided into 3 categories. We have our crucifer vegetables, and those, think broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, dandelions. Oh, you know what? I am going to step back here because I was remiss. I can move back in my slide deck. I forgot a very important, master ingredient here, and that's sulforaphane. Okay, so sulforaphane is actually my favorite, and that's why I knew I forgot something. And I would say if I was going to pick one, sulforaphane would definitely be the one that we need to include. It needs to be on our plate every single day. So sulforaphane is found in our cruciferous vegetables. It's found in broccoli, cauliflower, kale, radishes. Believe it or not, the tops of radishes are very high in quercetin and sulforaphane. Turnips, all those vegetables that can contain sulfur. So for those of you, and I know many of you have either friends or family members who may not favor this sulfur tasting or that more strong tasting vegetable. And so one tip that you can use in trying to incorporate more of these into your diet is to combine these or pair these with a fruit. So it could be a fresh fruit, it could be a dried fruit or a frozen fruit. Combine those with your crucifers or your brassicas. And that kind of takes it provides a sweetness that takes your taste buds in a totally different direction. And many times people will start to enjoy those super powerful vegetables when maybe they possibly avoided them before because of that very strong flavor that tends to correlate with those vegetables. So if you want to see how this goes in action, I do have a recipe packet that we're sending out afterwards, and you can try the root vegetable slaw, which combines these super soporific vegetables with some fruit and to enhance the flavor or complement the flavor. And hopefully you can give this a try yourself in your kitchen or with your friends or family. So again, the vegetables are, we see our crucifers, sometimes called brassica vegetables. Then we have alliums, which again, remember those are the ones that are super high in quercetin, garlic, leeks, onions, and shallots. And then we have the other category, carrots and fennel. It's not hard to remember the herbs. If you start with parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, that old adage. And then add in some oregano, dill, cilantro, chives, and basil, lavender, and lovage. These are the herbs that are packed with those 5 bioactive ingredients. And look at the fruits. They're also kind of easy to remember. And take a look at the color, red, dark purple, dark blue. And so if you forget, chances are if you pick the most colorful vegetables in the produce aisle or colorful fruit, then you're making the right selection relative to this master ingredient list. And then we also have on the right the kind of these spices and other foods, like the capers we mentioned earlier, but green tea, honey, olive oil, red wine, and then we have ginger, chili peppers, and turmeric. So you start to see all the things maybe you've heard about, like green tea or using honey or olive oil. Now you know why these ingredients work so well in our diets to really provide long-term nutrition. So let's look at our enabler ingredients. Okay, these are, or I should say, I'm sorry, I called it the enabler, the influencer ingredients. These foods influence the ability to grow and regenerate and maintain healthy healthy brain cells, because our brain cells, as we said, are made up of fat. So these are the healthy fats that we need to include every single day. They are omega-3 fatty acids, and they are essential because we cannot make omega-3 fatty acids in our bodies. So we have to get them from our diet. It's essential that we get them from our diet every day because we cannot make them. So there's 2 kinds of fatty or omega-3 fatty acids in general. The ones that come from plant foods, those are called ALAs, or alpha linolenic acid, found in vegetables such as canola and flaxseed and walnuts. But it's also found a little bit in some of the green vegetables we just talked about, Brussels sprouts, kale, and spinach. Some salad greens can be rich in this plant ALA. The other type is called EPA and DHA combined, and those are from our animal sources, seafood and animal proteins that provide the DHA and the EPA. And they are much more bioavailable to us. We're going to be able to use the omega-3 fatty acids from those animal sources much more readily than we are the plant sources. But it's important that, some people are not going to gravitate toward these animal sources, especially if they're vegan. So it's important that they actually pay super attention to this category of foods and make sure they get in plenty of these vegetable sources, of these plant sources. So unfortunately, Americans do not eat actually enough of either type. And it's really a shame because these fatty acids are so important to our health. In fact, you can Google this and look at YouTube, and there is a very interesting study done by the equivalent of the Great Britain's CDC, where they actually looked at assessing the improvement of memory and learning in children and handwriting in children over a 6-month period given supplemental omega-3 fatty acids. And what they found, they determined that giving a supplement, which they don't do, and I'm sure there's ethical reasons for that, but they said it could be the biggest social change in education in their entire system if they could manage to get more omega-3s into these children. So they saw such a dramatic improvement over the 6 months. I think if you look at that Google, or you can Google that YouTube, you'd be super impressed about the power of omega-3 fatty acids on our brain health. So cooking matters. I often get this question. Should I eat these foods raw? Should I eat them cooked? Or how do I cook them? And cooking matters in terms of these bioactives, the sulforaphane, the curcumin, the lycopene, the resveratrol, and the quercetin are individually affected by cooking techniques. And it can increase or decrease the power of those bioactive ingredients. So in general, so that's olive oil. We think about cooking with oil, heat and time, cooking time, what I call chop, hold, and chew. We'll talk about that in a minute. And this amazing power of synergy in our foods. So olive oil in general is considered a big enhancer. So it's definitely known for enhancing the activity of a curcumin. Again, remember that was in turmeric, as well as the lycopene in tomatoes, the quercetin in allium. And in general, you can say olive oil enhances the activity of all spices and herbs. And if we think about it globally, most cultures use olive oil or even coconut oil, and both give that amazing effect to those bioactives, enhancing their activity. So heating and cooking time, it's a little more tricky. So tomatoes and turmeric and peanuts, so we're thinking, okay, lycopene, curcumin, and quercetin are enhanced with heat and cooking time, okay? While sulforaphane, that bioactive in our crucifer vegetables, is sensitive to anything greater than 30 seconds. And I think that's kind of surprising to most people. So we start to think about, how can I add raw cruciferous vegetables, raw brassicas, into my diet, into my daily routine? And you might think about, okay, can I just include topping dishes with sliced radishes, or subbing chips for raw cruciferous vegetables? Another thing I like to do is grate my cauliflower into a salad, and it's an amazing addition, giving it some texture, as well as putting cauliflower into a smoothie. It actually creates such a nice creaminess that you don't even really notice, you don't notice the actual flavor. And certainly making slaws out of cabbage or Brussels sprouts is a great way to think about, how can I add raw cruciferous vegetables to my diet. I think one of my favorite ways, I really challenge myself because I am not a lover of raw broccoli. So I tried just really lightly steaming it for less than 30 seconds and then chopping it and marinating some chopped shallots in a favorite vinaigrette. And then I toss it all together, and it really is such a simple but amazing salad to have in your refrigerator. And the longer it sits there and marinates, I think the tastier it gets. So it's a great dish or meal to take with you, even if you're traveling or taking your lunch to the office. So chop, hold, and chew. What do I mean by that? I'm going to take a sip of water. So chopping and holding allows bioactives to become more active. It actually starts the process of increasing their activity before it even gets in our bodies. So this is especially true for alliums and cruciferous vegetables. So think garlic, shallots, onions, and leeks. Chopping and holding them for 10 to 30 minutes enhances this activity. The same is true for cruciferous vegetables. So if you chop up your broccoli, hold it for 10 to 30 minutes, and then steam it, you've already started to activate the that nutrient, that sulforaphane, before it even goes into your body. The same thing is true with chewing. And so sometimes we forget in this hectic lifestyle that we forget to appreciate what goes on with chewing. And it's certainly only one of the things is that it actually activates these bioactives. So remember, chewing is super important to include and think about, not just for mindful eating, but also to enhance. And maybe you might think about it while you're chewing, all the good you're doing to enhance these amazing ingredients that you've put onto your plate. And then there's variety. Adding or blending these ingredients is so important. And it definitely creates a 1 + 1 = 3. And studies actually show, they've done numerous studies combining these bioactives together with foods. So in other words, we're taking different spices and different of these master ingredients and combining them together, and they see an exponential benefit or exponential effect of the bioactivity of these nutrients. So I find that just super fascinating. And again, when we think about the global application of these ingredients, most of these are always combined together, or very often in global cuisine. So Dan Ostermiller, he has a nutrition prescription for you. So you think, okay, well, how much do I need to eat of these things every single day? So let's boil it down. So what do I need to do? Number 1, average 2 ounces of smash seafood per day. And what do I mean by smash? That's your sardines, your mackerel, your mussels, your anchovies, your salmon, your herring, and your halibut. It's a super easy way to remember which seafood is most powerful in your diet. So averaging about 2 ounces per day will give us that minimum requirement of our omega-3 fatty acids, which we need, remember, for that healthy brain cell to regenerate and regrow. Number 2, include daily plant fats such as chia seeds, ground flaxseed, hemp seeds, walnuts, and avocado to obtain additional or plant sources of ALA, that other source of omega-3 fatty acids. And number 3, people are always asking me, how much produce do I need to eat every day? And in general, I say 21 ounces of a variety of these master produce items every single day will get you where you need to go. Another way of looking at it is anything north of 8 servings a day. And by a serving, I mean about a half a cup of a raw vegetable or a cup of a leafy green. So in summary, the brain is metabolically super active, very active. It takes in a lot of calories and a lot of energy relative to its actual weight. It impacts many systems in the body, so it's worth taking a look at and paying attention to, right, in terms of our long-term health and well-being. Bioactives are more powerful than any single nutrient to induce cellular health through our gene expression, and they can actually override any kind of a gene variation we may be carrying, whether or not we know what that gene variation is. And brain cells require healthy fats to regenerate. And so we cannot stimulate brain regeneration or brain cell development without those healthy fats, as omega-3s on board. We can find all these ingredients at our local store, and they are collectively, I love the word Dan used, foundational. And remember, cooking matters. Everything you do in the kitchen can actually activate, enhance, or even destroy or decrease those active ingredients. So learning how to navigate them in your kitchen is very important. So you'll find actually some of these tips for cooking in the recipe packet that I'm going to send out, or Sam is going to send out after our presentation. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I'd love to stay connected. I love to exchange ideas. If you have any feedback or questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. You can reach me on my cell phone or via my website, mintnutrition.org. And I have actually I have quite a few raw cruciferous vegetable recipes on that website. You can subscribe to my blog or just enjoy, and I hope to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Susan, you ended up just right on time to allow people to ask questions. So it's perfect. We met yesterday and talked about this, and I was so amazed because I've always recommended cruciferous vegetables for my patients. You know, it also helps prevent cancer, heart disease, and it's that same gene activation you told me. Mm-hmm. But I had no idea that it had to be raw, you know, mm-hmm. And so that was totally new to me. So thank you and for bringing that to everybody. Because I think, you know, we always cook broccoli and you don't want to overdo it, but nevertheless, you know, now it's only 30 seconds that I can cook it. So that was brand new information for me yesterday.
Well, good. Yeah. If I had to pick one off the list, that would be my favorite bioactive, that favorite food group to encourage everybody to include in their daily routine.
Yeah, it's one of mine too. And a handful. You have to do a handful. Just half a cup.
Mm-hmm. Susan, that was fantastic. I learned a lot. I have to say I'm very proud of myself. I think I'm doing some things right in my own kitchen, but yeah, mind blown on the 30 seconds thing. And we do have a couple of questions in the chat box. So they're both from Renee first. Okay. Was wondering about, Renee, you're welcome to go ahead and ask your question if you'd like, instead of me reading it to Susan.
Okay. Thanks, Nicole. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Renee. Good to see you.
Likewise. Okay, so quercetin, I use it to control when I have mast cell hyperactivity. And I noticed when you were talking about it, you were mentioning foods that tended to be purple. And I know that there's more of it in a purple onion than a white onion. And I'm just curious whether it's something that is generally found in purple food. Do you know?
Okay, I'm so glad you mentioned that because I must have misspoke. So I apologize. So quercetin is found in, not exclusively in purple foods. So what I think I was mentioning there is the elderberry, which is dark purple, pink grapefruit, and I'm sorry, no, I'll take that back. Elderberry, dark purple, is very high in quercetin, but also fennel and carrots and capers are also very high. Apples are very high in quercetin. So I missed.
Yes, yeah, apples. I did know that. Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't mean to misspeak there.
No, you didn't misspeak. Okay. I just noticed that you said capers and elderberry, and I thought, huh. Yeah. Okay, good to know. And I just think quercetin is so important. And the other question was, you mentioned chopping and holding foods for cooking, and I'm so glad you mentioned that because sometimes I'd like to know more about it. Like which foods is it better to hold? Is it just alums like garlic and onions, or do you think we should wait before cooking all vegetables? What's your take on that?
So the studies that I have read really pertain to the quercetin and alliums. Now, I don't know if that would pertain to the quercetin in capers or not. I don't know, but I've read a lot about the alliums. So chopping and holding our shallots, garlic, onions, and leeks. And also our cruciferous. So the other studies I've read are in regards to sulforaphane and contained in cruciferous vegetables. So those are the two that I've seen this culinary studies on.
So chop and hold alums and cruciferous.
Yes.
Like broccoli.
Yes.
I have a follow-up question on that. You know, meal prepping has become something really really popular. And so is there a diminishing effect if you hold them for too long? Is there like a sweet spot for chopping these certain things and getting the benefit out of it?
Okay, so we think about what are we activating? We're activating an enzyme. Okay, that's what's actually happening when we chop. And so when we're holding that 10 to 30 minutes, I would assume, it's a good question, because I'd have to assume, I don't know this, but I would have to assume that enzyme activity diminishes after a certain amount of time. There's probably a peak, and the literature I've read is 10 to 30 minutes. So I'm assuming it starts going down after that.
What do you think about the garlic that you can buy already pre-chopped in the jar? It's so easy to use. Do you think it's lost value since it's sitting in that jar? Or
I would look at the label to see if there's any preservative in it. You know, if they're adding anything. Someone's sensitive to corn, let's say, if they add citric acid to it, you know, now we've got another food group introduced, right? So I always look at the label. I would, going with what Nicole just mentioned, I would kind of assume that that function has kind of declined.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think yesterday we were talking about the Mediterranean diet. That's one of our favorite diets, because pretty much you presented the Mediterranean diet. And so that might help everyone if they look at that and say, okay, how do I get all this into explain it is through the Mediterranean diet. Is there anything else you want to say about that? Or?
Well, it is so we hear about so much about the Mediterranean diet and what's called the MIND diet, which is an offshoot of the Mediterranean diet for brain health. And so we hear a lot about olive oil, right? And we hear somewhat about spices, but now hopefully everybody understands like maybe what is behind the Mediterranean diet that goes farther than what we maybe thought before, right? Like we hear about reduced amount of meat and maybe a few grains. We hear about this or some fermented foods. But now if we go a level deeper, we kind of understand that this cooking in olive oil enhances the bioactivity, the variety, and the combining these foods together, the synergy it creates, it really enhances the bioactivity. So the cooking of tomatoes, you know, the big addition to the Mediterranean diet. So we have to kind of think it goes beyond just maybe what we have. It's maybe the Mediterranean diet's kind of been diluted to kind of a fad, you know, topic or name, but without a really good appreciation for actually what's going on there at a very chemical level, a cellular level.
Yeah.
Susan, Kelly was wondering about cooking with avocado oil.
So I think cooking with avocado oil is great. It's certainly a very healthy oil. I think that my choice would be the olive oil because of the bioactivity of the olive oil, those bioactives being in a master ingredient. So I would choose to use olive oil, assuming that if I'm using avocado, I'm replacing my olive oil with avocado oil. So I think I would default to using olive oil instead.
Okay, which is a great segue to Vonnie's question, which would be, does cooking olive oil need to be at a low heat?
Well, it's kind of interesting. There is a study done at UC Davis that they put olive oil into an oven at 350 degrees for 24 hours. And it did not degrade, which is kind of interesting. So we always think of, yes, it is somewhat of a sensitive oil, but is it those, what they call polyphenols, is it that bioactive that's actually preventing the breakdown of the cell of that fat? That's what they've proposed, that there's something within the olive oil that's actually so protective that I would never tell someone to fry with it, let's say, but there's pretty good evidence that it's stable at 350 for 24 hours, which I think is pretty impressive.
Yeah, thanks for that, Susan, because there's a study out of Australia where they put olive oil against canola oil, they tried all the oils, and the most stable oil there was olive oil. And so, you know, we always said, don't use olive oil at high heat, go to canola. That's wrong. Use olive oil for everything.
Yes.
Yeah. And then great segue into the next question from Deanna, which is that she saw that canola oil is on the list of enhancers, but that she thinks of canola as something that we want to avoid at this point. So
yes, that is a great question. And I almost took it off the list, but I didn't have the heart to, because I know it's an approachable ingredient for many people. So, you know, given the choice, I'd say, okay, if you can't do olive oil, canola oil. Canola, though, is a very toxic product. They spray it, and it's, we think about where toxins navigate to in our bodies. It's our fat. So yeah, the same thing with food. Okay, our food, anything that has a lot of fat in it, and oil is all fat, the toxins are going to congregate or concentrate in that area. So canola in general, even I would still be leery of an organic canola oil. Even I would really steer clear. But again, it's like the avocado. You have to think, okay, I'm taking canola, I'm putting it into my diet. That means I'm taking olive oil out, most likely. So I would say it's not something I would generally recommend people to use, but it is high in omega-3 fatty acids.
okay.
I totally agree with that. They, you know, that's the genetic modified canola oil, so they can use Roundup on it. Roundup is not healthy for us. So I only use canola oil to like oil my grill. I don't use it.
So I think thank you for asking that question, Deanna.
Sherry has a question, and she says, where do mushrooms fit into this discussion, or do they? And if so, which ones, and any cooking recommendations?
That's another. Do you want to answer that, Deanna, or do you want me to take it? Or it's a good question. So Dan and I had tossed around talking about mushrooms, because there are some novel ingredients that you hear about for brain health. You know, ginkgo being a real popular one, certain mushrooms, cordyceps being one, bacopa is another. So I didn't include them because we're not talking just about button mushrooms. We're kind of talking about more novel mushrooms. And when you look up what those mushrooms actually do, they activate the NRF2 pathway. That's their mechanism of action. So yes, I think they're great. But when we start recommending these novel ingredients, people kind of do a student body left and say, okay, I took my mushroom powder in my coffee today. I don't need to do anything else. And so while those are very impactful, it's not a foundation, because it's not typically a food that we have in our diets on a daily basis, or can put into our diets on a daily basis. And they're very specific mushrooms that have been identified for improving brain health. Those cordyceps are probably the foremost. Lion's mane for nerve regeneration has been used, nerve regeneration in the brain as well as in the gastrointestinal tract. But it's more of a novel ingredient. So again, I like people to focus on their food in their kitchen first, things that are approachable for everybody.
It sounds like we could do a whole series on mushrooms as well. One more question in the chat, which is from Kelly, and she says, do you recommend all organic?
Certainly, it would be great if all our food was organic, right? Everything we came in contact with, that would be really nice to have that confidence in our food supply. I think certain food, so everybody has a food budget, right? Everybody, if, you know, in the world where we had unlimited funds, then we could say, okay, why not just eat more organic? It's certainly, for the most part, you can be confident it's at least a little more healthy and it tastes better. But certainly where I default on that is to select a few certain ingredients that we know are more highly contaminated. So our dark leafy greens, they're thin, right? And we eat the whole leaf. And so we're going to be exposing ourselves to more toxins. I choose to buy organic. Mostly fruits with skins on them, from the berries to apples to any kind of stone fruit. I think it's important to maybe select organic. And one really good place to go to is ewg.org, environmentalworkinggroup.org. And every year they publish their Dirty Dozen and their Clean 15. So that's a great way to get started to say, okay, how am I going to spend my food dollar? And I'll start with the Dirty Dozen, take those out and select organic. I think for me, I think eating local is even better than eating organic. When we can buy here locally, we have some amazing food sources right here, like the sprouts or the vegetables that we can get, the meats that we can get, the seafood from Alaska. Those are not necessarily organic certified, but they're local and we know who grows them, and then we can have even more confidence in those foods.
That is a great answer. And we are just about out of time. So is there any more questions or anything that you would like to leave us with, Susan?
Well, thank you so much, Nicole and Dan, for this opportunity to talk to everybody. I am so passionate about food, and when in studying the what it can do for us, and I really became so fascinated in this NRF2 pathway, how it lights up this Christmas tree, this effect in our bodies to decrease inflammation, enhance our detoxification, and balance inflammation. And so I hope I'm leaving everybody with some inspiration there to get into their kitchens and not worry too much about it, other than they have some of these concepts that they can apply right today when they're in the grocery store.
Thank you, Susan. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I think everybody learned something. I saw a lot of nodding heads and big eyes at different pieces of information that you gave us. Dr. Dan Ostemiller, we love having you for Ponderosa Center Presents, and thank you for helping moderate the session today. Thank you for being here. Please visit our website to our community page. We're currently doing a survey right now about the Ponderosa Center and what the community is looking for in a community gathering space. We have some more Ponderosa Center Presents events coming up through the month of May, so be on the lookout for that. And thank you again for joining us. It was wonderful having you all. Have a
Thank you.
day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Bye-bye.
Good seeing everybody. What a treat.